leadership is something that's, for me at least, it's inbuilt within you. It's not a career choice you make saying,
Hmm.
from now on, I want to be a leader. It's just something you feel deeply about. And in the context of a company and what the company wants to do, you find ways to showcase those traits.
Welcome everyone to the Tech Guide podcast, where we give actual advice to those that are wanting to break into tech or are looking for their next gig. We have Adi on the podcast today to talk about engineering and leadership, two topics I'm super excited to talk with you more about. So Adi, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, me as well, because you have a great background in tech, engineering, all of that good stuff. I'm always curious, like an origin story about like how you fell in love with like engineering and tech. Is there like a specific moment in time for you where you're like, you know what, I really enjoy to put stuff together. I really enjoy this engineering stuff.
So it's interesting. It started off with like I was doing my I did most of my education in India, uh, and one of the things that happened was uh, the chief minister of the state I used to live in started a new establishment called High Tech City that would invite tech companies from around the world
That's
and take advantage of the Indian workforce. And Bill Gates was one of the earliest tech uh, 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 celebrities, for lack of a better word, who came to our city, and he kind of opened up Microsoft. And that's what really, like, I my earliest interest in tech in general was video games for
mm,
most part. But then when I saw what the kind of opportunities that came in because of Bill Gates visiting Hyderabad, which is where I'm from, I really got interested in it as a career and as an industry as a whole. And I started reading up more about it, and yeah, I was just through that I kind of tried to find ways. Obviously, the phase of life I was in at that point, the only way to enter tech was through a consulting slash service industry background. So I started my career with a service industry. I worked for a few years in India and then moved to the US, where I continued doing contract jobs. And yeah, I did most of my career in consulting and eventually made my way through retail and then to fintech.
yeah, that's super cool. I think that's so cool that it all stems from a little bit of video games, but also from like a
Yes.
Bill Gates, like just visiting and stuff. That it just had been such a cool experience at the time. Were you like actually in the city when like Bill Gates was like coming?
I was in the city, but yeah, but obviously I didn't have access to the event.
Yeah.
Didn't have YouTube then either. It was just reading about it in newspapers and knowing about it
What
several days
someone
after.
that's 25 might be asking what's a newspaper. I'm just kidding. I hope not. But I think that's so cool. I bet the energy there just to like have a presence like Bill Gates, like one of these big
Yeah,
tech founders, like one of the most influential people in the world, within like your own city, like in India. I think that would be such a cool experience that you had.
absolutely. And one of the early books that I started reading after finishing my undergrad was the Google story, which talked about how
Mm.
Google came into being. And so to see Bill Gates come into our city and talk about what Microsoft is and what Microsoft does was quite fascinating. And it was great to be a part of that environment where almost every college grad was excited about getting into tech. And there was a
That's so
company named Infosys, which was a very big deal in India at that point of time. So
yeah.
that was obviously the first target that I wanted to
Yeah.
shoot for. So yeah,
I think that's super interesting. Because there's always that like one like, oh, like I want to go work at this company. It sounds like you guys had it with them.
yeah.
But I do want to talk about your leadership, because obviously you've done great things. You've owned so many different management roles, director roles, senior engineering leader roles. I'm curious. Let's define leadership to start off. What does leadership mean to you?
So to me, leadership is more about enabling things in a company. So enabling and helping engineers on your team, enabling products to be built and shipped out. So yeah, being there to make things happen is what leadership is primarily about for me, both at a technical level and at a people level. And then obviously, depending on the stage of the company you're in, you can have added responsibilities like taking care of processes to ensure there's
Yeah.
higher developer productivity, etc. So yeah, strangely, my interest in leadership came not from tech. I used to do theater when I started my career in India.
No way.
Yeah, so I've had a very strong inclination towards the creative arts. I did a program in screenwriting from UCLA's film school as well. Uh, so
That's
yeah, so one of the strongest experiences of leadership I experienced was when I was doing a play during my theater days, where I forgot my line, and one of the senior actors who was on stage with me let go of his big punch dialogue, so to speak, and kind of moved on just so that I could recover in that moment and let the play go on. And that to me was a very strong moment of what it meant to be a leader, to make sure that the show goes on and you don't worry about your individual spotlight being on your own self. And that kind of really shaped the definition of leadership for me.
That is so cool. And I think like similar to like that Bill Gates story, there's always like a story you remember that just like shapes leadership for you. For me, I ran a like a triathlon, like a sprint triathlon like
Wow.
4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. And so I got through the swimming and the biking fine, but the running, I'm an awful runner. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a good runner. And I'm running with my friends and I'm literally just panting along, like basically walking. And like my friend did not leave my side like at all, like throughout the whole thing, even though he could finish probably so much earlier.
Yeah,
So it's so cool because that's just like in the back of my mind that shapes leadership to what you said.
absolutely. Like for me, I think that's one of the things I've learned over the years. It's that leadership is something that's, for me at least, it's inbuilt within you. It's not a career choice you make saying,
Mm-hmm.
from now on, I want to be a leader. It's just something you try, you feel deeply about, and in the context of a company and what the company wants to do, you find ways to showcase those traits, and yeah, let
Yeah.
help the company and the people in, essentially.
Yeah. And speaking of those traits, tell me like what are three traits that you would recommend people or three traits of a great leader in your eyes?
I think the most important for me, at least personally, is curiosity.
Mm,
Because as a leader, there are several moments where you're working outside of your comfort zone. So approaching any work or any challenge with a sense of curiosity, I think, is very important. Because a lot of the times you have experts doing the job. Like you have a staff engineer or a principal engineer on the technical front. Then you have product managers. You have experts on every level. Uh, for you to succeed as a leader, I think you have to be curious about what each of your stakeholders are doing and
mm,
why that matters and how you can help them. So curiosity is
interesting.
a big quality from a leadership perspective. And I also kind of imbibe that through the leadership principle from UC Berkeley, where I did my MBA. One of the things that stuck with me very strongly was the leadership principle called student forever.
Mm,
So that I think is an important trait for me. Empathy is another one, because a lot of the times teams that you work with or engineers you work with can be very unlike you.
yeah.
So a lot of the concerns that they may have might not make sense to you inherently based on your life experiences, but it's important to have that empathy and be able to, kind of put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, and
And
I think that's that word has come up a lot. I feel like in the past like 5 years is empathy and like emotional intelligence of like understanding people come from all these like different cultures, different backgrounds, but being able to put yourself in their shoes
yeah,
really makes you stand out as a leader and be able to empathize like, oh, I understand like where you might be coming from, or I can see that from your viewpoint. Some of the best leaders I've ever had, they share that trait as well.
yeah. So that's something. As you grow through your career, I think you have you may feel empathy, but to exhibit that is, I think, something that you need to kind of work on, and I've had to work on that as well. So that's certainly an important trait. And
Yeah.
the third one I'd say would be trust,
Really.
because a lot of the times you make mistakes, your team members make mistakes. You have to be in a
Yeah.
position where even if you make a mistake, your team feels that, has the confidence, that has the trust that you are going to get past that and do what's uh, good for the team as a whole. And likewise,
Mm,
you should create an environment of vulnerability and trust within your team, I feel, as a leader, where your team members are encouraged to try out new things, make mistakes, and share that without fear of being uh, judged. Obviously, when I say make mistakes, I don't mean
yeah.
breaking production, taking calculated risks. And yeah, setting up that environment of trust, I think, is very critical, in my opinion, to being a leader.
Yeah, and it speaks to that trust factor too. Just because like today, like for my work, for example, like I made a mistake. Long story short, I made a mistake, and it's just like owning up to it. But to be able to own up to a mistake, one, like it takes character, but two, like you need to be within an environment where that trust is built, where you can be vulnerable, be like, hey guys, like this was
Yes.
my bad, my fault on that. So I think that's really important. But I did want to ask you, emotional intelligence and empathy and building that skill. You said that you built it up throughout your career. Can you take us like how have you built that up?
I can give you a couple of examples. I think it's just, uh, as I said, a large part of my career was in consulting, where I
Mm-hmm.
worked for companies from different parts of the world, people from different
Yeah.
cultures, and that's something that I'm really thankful for. Like when I was in Cognizant and with Equity Group, which eventually became Accenture Interactive, uh, I moved from project to project every 2 years on an average. So you get to meet with a wide variety of people from different demographics and different technical capacities as well. So just being open to different perspectives while maintaining. So one of the early mistakes I made was being very open to everyone's concerns, and
Mm.
then that caused some delays with the work, etc. So I think one of the key things that I've come to learn over the period of time is it's not always going to be a democracy. So you have to do certain things that the company requires your org or your
Yeah.
team to do, right? As a leader, my effort in establishing that empathy is to create a boundary, saying like, these are the things that are non-negotiables. These are the things we cannot
Yeah.
do. Within this boundary, we're free to experiment and try out different things. And I encourage my team to kind of feel free to try out new things within that boundary, and that can keep changing depending on the size of the company, the stage the company is in. But I think just setting up those expectations upfront really helps avoid any misunderstanding.
And with that, like with those expectations, you also have to hold people like accountable to like stay within those boundaries, but to also be like be experimental within those boundaries, but don't
Yeah.
go over those boundaries. And I feel like accountability is like one of the it's hard for me anyways, as like when I think about my leadership, is like it's really hard to like keep people accountable
Yeah.
just because like I don't know, like I'm just so young, and like it's like how do I tell someone older than me to like do this? And so, yeah, accountability is obviously one of the huge traits of a leader, and it's interesting to have those boundaries, but to also keep people accountable.
Absolutely. So I think trust and accountability go hand in hand,
Yeah.
and that's another thing that I've learned over time. As I
Mm,
said, when I became a leader, when I became a manager very early on, my default go-to mode would be to take ownership of any mistakes that happen on my team and kind of be the face of kind of face up to senior leadership.
yeah.
But through time, I've realized it's more helpful. It's a lot more productive when you have that conversation with your team and then set up like something like a postmortem task wherein you encourage the responsible engineer to work with you and you provide the details to the senior leadership, but then understanding why that mistake happened, what we could do to prevent that from
Mm,
happening again, and incorporating lessons learned and tasks, follow-up tasks are still assigned to the person who should be taking responsibility.
yeah.
And so that's one of the changes that I started making. I started providing more visibility while taking ownership. I started
Mm,
providing more visibility and transparency into how the mistake happened or how we messed something up. And more often than not, most engineers like taking responsibility. Most engineers like the fact that even if there was a production issue or a mistake that we made, just being able to communicate to leadership that yes, this has happened, we'll take care of it going ahead, and being able to provide timely updates on how we are fixing that problem is something that most engineers appreciate being given the opportunity for. So
yeah.
yeah, so that's one way I think leaders can pursue trust while maintaining accountability.
Yeah, I'll say I bet like your former team like had to like love you for that, for to be able to like be the face of like, oh, that was our mistake, but like this is how we're fixing it, this is how we're implementing it. I think that's super important, is to have that transparency as well. Is like, once you do make a mistake, like, here are the steps we have in place to fix this problem, and then fix the problem essentially. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that accountability is huge, and owning up to your mistakes is it's just a great trait to have as a leader.
And it's a great thing that I've been able to use in mentoring engineers who wanted to become leaders as well, like giving those responsibilities where you help your team out is a great way to train someone to become a leader as well.
What are some of the other ways that you would train someone to become a leader? What are like two other ways? It sounds like giving them that leadership, but like, what are like two other ways you train people to become leaders?
So one of the things I've tried to maintain for my own career, and I've tried to share this with my engineers, has been an overlap of the familiar versus the challenge. So 60% of the work should feel like something that you've done in the past, and it should feel like something that uh, you're aware of, and then 40% of your work can be stuff that you've never tried in the past, and it can feel a little overwhelming, but it's nice to push yourself out of your comfort zone and do that kind of work. Obviously, this ratio will change depending on what kind of a company you're in. If you're in like
Yeah.
an early stage startup, you don't have scope, you don't have time to be working on your comfort
Yeah.
zone or familiar stuff. You're constantly trying out new things. So the ratio as such would change depending on which company and what kind of an environment you're in. But I encourage my engineers to try and have that balance of taking on work that you know you can finish in a certain amount of time, and then taking on at least one task or two where uh, you don't know how to do it, and you're trying to challenge yourself, and where you're forced to kind of build relations across teams and create cross-functional collaborations. So that more
Yeah.
often than not, it helps you learn beyond just the technical aspects, and helps you forge strong relations across the company.
Yeah, I think that's a really important concept as well. Is like, you want to be working on stuff that you can do, but it's also super important to be working on stuff that does push you outside your comfort zone. Because when we're outside our comfort zone, that's like, it's so cliche, but that is literally when we grow and like we become
Absolutely.
better people. So I love that you push them to get outside your comfort zone, grow and learn from those mistakes that you're undoubtedly going to make, but it's learning from those mistakes and becoming a better person. And that is really how you grow.
Absolutely. And then as I said, like the ratio and the amount of risk someone takes obviously changes from person to person. Like someone who's
Yep.
just joined the company, chances are everything is going to be new to them. So you don't want to put them, you don't want to put too many challenges on their plate. You want to set them up for success. Whereas if it's someone who's been with the company for a while, you want to make sure that they're trying out new things and taking on chances.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really hard balance, though. As a leader, obviously, I haven't been put in this position yet, but like, once someone's like in a groove, like what they're doing at work, they like what they're doing. It's hard to always be pushing them to like keep learning, keep learning, keep learning. But
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of like the A players that you've worked with, they love that challenge to
Yeah.
keep learning, keep growing. Because you said, going back to one of your first principles, to always be a student or always be curious.
Absolutely.
I feel like that goes right along with that.
And the best engineers I've worked with have actually kept me on my toes by coming to me and
Yeah.
asking, like, all right, we've done this part. Like, what's something new we can pick up? Like, what new challenge can I pick up? So I really appreciate engineers who are proactive in that sense and try to create new opportunities for themselves.
Yeah. And how would you recommend someone young in their career to create new opportunities for themselves?
So again, just being curious about why we're doing certain things. There's a famous framework by Simon Sinek, which says start from the why.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a junior engineer just out of bachelor's, like, yes, you want to do sufficient work so you establish a certain amount of credibility. But once you've done that, and even in the process of establishing that credibility, I think if you ask questions as to why we're doing certain things, a lot of times someone who is not deeply embedded in an ecosystem can ask more intelligent questions as to why we're doing certain things a certain way, and those questions can help you create new opportunities, at the very least create visibility for you. So I'd always say try to understand why we're doing certain things, and question processes and approaches. Yeah, I think that for someone who's just starting out in the career, that's a great way to make yourself heard. And even for experienced people, when you join a new company, that's something that I follow in my career as well. Like when I join a new company, I try to follow what I call a reverse pyramid approach. So
Mm.
the first 1 month, I try to learn breadth, what's
I
happening
like
across the
this.
company, different orgs, etc. And through over a course of time, I'll maybe have one or two things that I specialize in, and I kind of narrow that down and try to establish a specialization. But start off by trying to get as much knowledge as possible and see what makes sense to you.
Yes, I love that. And I feel like so I'm 24 right now, and that's what like people in their 20s they always say like just try as many things as possible, and eventually like you're going to like find like what you really like. And I feel like that hits home to is like spread yourself not thin, but spread yourself thin on doing stuff, but eventually you're going to find like those 3, 4, 5, 6 things that you
Yep.
really enjoy. That's when you really build your career and specialize in something. So yeah, that's great advice always.
Yeah, and I think especially in certain markets like the Bay Area market, etc., there's a lot of pressure on us to uh, hit the ball out of the park right away and start getting noticed from day one. But I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's okay to take your time to figure out what kind of work excites you. Like I realized through my career that uh, consumer facing products, there was a phase in my life where I was building applications for banks and financial institutions, and
Mm.
I could never relate to those products, and I just did it as a job. But the minute I was exposed to e-commerce and B2C and B2B applications, something clicked because it was a product. It was on
Interesting.
the lines of a product that I used on a daily basis. So, and my career was, I was very successful in that phase as long as I worked in that area. And then when the crypto and the blockchain thing happened, I got interested in fintech, and that's how I made the shift as well. So I think it's very important to find out what kind of applications or what kind of work excites you,
Yeah.
and not be in a rush to be get to the top, essentially.
How I want to ask this question is just essentially if you don't say you're in a role right now, you enjoy it, you don't love it, and you're like looking to pivot or something, but like you don't want to switch jobs right now and just like join a random industry.
Mhm.
What are some of the ways that you would recommend someone to identify a potential way that they could pivot their career to a new industry?
Right. So, if you're fortunate enough to be working in a big company like the Apples and the FANG companies,
Yeah, yeah.
essentially, there's always multiple product lines going in a single company. So you have the luxury of trying out different teams, different products within the same company without having to quit your job. Uh, that's one option, obviously. But if you're working for a startup, you might not have those many opportunities. But definitely start talking to your leader about trying out something new and wanting to get exposure towards something new within the context of the company. But if you feel like you don't align with the goals of the company itself, then maybe it could be a little different. You might have to invest extra time in building something on your own and
Yeah.
exploring stuff on your own, which I still think is uh, which I think is getting easier now with Gen AI and
Yeah, yeah.
you don't have to learn a new language from the scratch. Coding has become a lot more accessible nowadays. So yeah, I think pet projects, side projects are always a good area, a good way to try out new things.
Yeah, and I think you spoke to it as well. Like if you are in a big company, there's so many different product lines where maybe you don't even have to switch like industries. Maybe you want to just try a new role. If you're in a marketing role, you want to go to product management, vice
Yeah,
versa. And yeah, I definitely think that you should look inward at your company. And if not, that's when you do the side projects. That's when you maybe read books, podcasts
yeah,
to identify, oh, you know what, this actually sounds really interesting. Let me give this a shot before you go 2 feet into the water and without knowing what the industry is like at all. So I think that's a really important concept as well.
especially in today's market, I think it becomes a little more tricky to make any kind
Yeah.
of pivots. So one thing I did in my career was pursuing an MBA, and I think higher education of any sort, whether it's a certificate course or a course from one of the MOOC platforms or from a university, can be a great way to try out different career options. Like one of the reasons I chose to do an MBA was because I was very interested in entrepreneurship. If not
Mm.
starting a company of my own, at least working with founders in early stage startups. And what the MBA allowed me to do was, over a course of 3 years, uh, the program allowed me to try out different career options rather it allowed me to simulate different career options without having to quit my day job. So I
No, that's
took a
awesome.
course in entrepreneurship, so I understood what pitching to VCs looks like, uh, what product market fit is, and how you strategize stuff. I took courses on finance and strategy. I took courses on product management, so I got to understand what it means to be a product manager without having to give
Yeah.
up my job as an engineering manager and move into a product management role. So that was a great way of simulating different career options and getting a feel for what that job might feel like. And I think if you want to be specifically within engineering and try out different domains, maybe doing a master's or like an online master's could really be helpful because it teaches you a breadth of skills.
Yeah, I actually did not know. This is so embarrassing. I'm gonna. I did not know NBAs. They like took you through like different skills and stuff. I was just thinking it was a bunch of like advanced economics to a certain sense. But it's interesting that you got to experience like what it's like to like pitch to VCs or work in a project management role without actually leaving your role. And so that's
Right.
another way that you can experience a pivot is essentially looking at your MBA. And then how did that
Absolutely.
MBA, once you did get that, how did that help your career? Did it propel you forward? Did it help unlock new opportunities, or like how did the MBA really like benefit you?
So I was definitely in a place where I was considering a few entrepreneurship ideas, but based on the phase of life that I was in, I couldn't afford. Like I was also on a work permit at that point of time, so I could not afford to quit my job and start
Just go.
something fresh. But it definitely created a different kind of mindset. So today, when I speak to
Mm,
product managers and go-to-market teams, etc., I have a sense of empathy and I understand their language. I'm not just walking in blind.
yeah.
I'm able to communicate much better, and I'm also able to ask better questions. So
Mm,
there's the tangible and then the intangible benefits you get from education. The tangible could be that soon after graduating you saw X dollars increase in your salary, and
yeah.
those are kind of things you look at. But the more important ones are the intangible ones because you're able to go to a founder or a product manager and you're able to talk to them in their language, and you're able to ask more precise questions. And that to me was a really great takeaway from the MBA.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes back asking precise questions back to like emotional intelligence and understanding where someone may be coming from. I feel like that's just like a beautiful way to intertwine those. Is
Yeah,
hey, like sure, maybe I didn't build $100 million business, but like I at least understand where you're coming from, and that just speaks back to leadership quality that you talked about earlier.
exactly, absolutely. And yeah, and obviously general leadership is one of the paths that you can pursue with an MBA. So that kind of helps you at least theoretically uh, understand how like the do's and don'ts of leadership and how you might want to approach like some of the sensitive things like approaching conflict and managing upwards, etc.
Well, Adi, leadership is one of my favorite topics to speak about. When we talk about going long and going deep, leadership is one of those topics I love about going deep with. So thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Ton of great insights here on leadership. So where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? Please link that all right here.
Thank you for having me once again. As I said, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can look me up as Adi, last name Kalidindi, Kalidindi. And yeah, I'm available. My contact details are provided on my LinkedIn profile as well. So happy to connect.
Awesome. Adi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. This was great.